If you see a woman on the road at night, don't stop. Before I forget, could you help me out? I asked the cashier, a young guy in his late teens or early 20s with noticeable acne. He paused, his hands midway through packing a bag with potato chips, 2 sodas, and a pack of Lucky Strike. Yeah, what's up? He responded after a moment of hesitation. I breathed a small sigh of relief. I had half expected a dismissive response. Eagerly, I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a folded item. See, I kind of got lost, decided to take a late night drive, and ended up all turned around on these back roads. I unfolded the map and laid it on the counter for both of us to see. Could you show me where we are? And more importantly, how to get back to the main road? He paused, a smirk beginning to form as silence filled the air. Then he burst into laughter, growing louder as he went. A paper map? Really, dude? What year do you think this is? 1993? Despite my annoyance, I let out another sigh, having anticipated some confusion from someone of his generation. I know, I admitted, seeing where his amusement stemmed from. He wiped away tears of laughter and finally asked, "Don't you have GPS in your car or something?" I gestured towards the gas station's entrance where my old beige Honda Accord from 1979 was parked. "Not in that relic," I replied with a wry smile. He peered over my shoulder, perhaps biting back another joke about my vintage car. Thankfully, he turned his attention back to the map, still chuckling. After a few moments of scrutinizing the paper, he snapped his fingers, ready to assist. "I've still got it," he declared with a hint of pride, pressing his finger firmly onto the center of the map. "We're right here, about 6 or 7 miles outside Placer." I leaned in closer as he withdrew his finger. Nodding in confirmation, I took out a pen, circled the spot for later reference, and scrutinized the map more closely. "Looks like there are several routes back to Interstate 5, huh?" I queried, seeking confirmation. The cashier, clearly less intrigued by our conversation, nodded again, his expression a mixture of boredom and slight annoyance. "Yeah, that's right," he replied dismissively, placing my purchases on the map. "That'll be $14.50 COs for these, and $28.50 COs for the gas." I fished out my wallet, handed him 3 20s, and he worked the register, which chimed open. He handed me my change, which I stuffed into my pocket, along with the wallet, grabbed my bag, and refolded the map. "Thanks for the help," I said, making my way to the door. "No problem," he muttered back, barely audible, as I opened the front door, setting off a gentle jingle from the small bell attached to the handle. The ambient noise of the store, humming refrigerators and softly buzzing fluorescent lights, faded behind me, replaced by the nocturnal symphony of a summertime forest. Crickets and cicadas performed a loud chorus in the grass around the store, overpowering the mechanical buzz of the lights above the pumps. An owl's hoot echoed through the trees, followed by the distinctive call of an elk. I breathed in the fresh, crisp air and descended the steps to my car. As I opened the driver's door and took one last survey of the surroundings, a voice from the passenger seat caught me off guard. "So did you find out where we are?" Confusion and panic momentarily took hold until I turned. It was just my friend, a smirk spreading across his face as he burst into laughter at my startled reaction. "Dude, were you in there so long you forgot I was waiting?" Craig joked, not really expecting an admission. Shaking my head, I dismissed the idea. "No, not that. Just sorting things out with that kid was a headache." Craig, one of my closest friends since we first met, nodded understandingly. We'd bonded instantly and become inseparable, often taking spontaneous late-night drives with no particular destination, just cruising to the sound of the radio and sharing a joint when the mood struck. It was the first time we'd actually gotten lost, though. Reaching into the bag, I handed him a bottle of Mr. Pibb. "Here," I said, pulling out the Lucky Strikes and tossing the rest into the back seat. I retrieved the keys from my pocket, slid them into the ignition, and turned them. The car's buzzer beeped as the dash lights flickered on, and the inline-4 engine purred to life, its familiar burble filling the air. I ripped open the cigarette pack, placed one in my mouth, and pressed the car's cigarette lighter. As I waited, I glanced back toward the store and froze. The cashier was standing at the door, staring out at us with unsettling intensity. "What the actual hell?" Craig noticed my alarmed look and turned to see for himself. "Dude, what's his problem?" I shook my head as the lighter popped out, ready for use. I lit my cigarette, took a drag, and exhaled a plume of smoke, my nerves on edge. "I don't know, but that's definitely creepy." Giving the store one final look, I saw the kid hadn't moved an inch, his gaze fixed on us with a chilling steadiness. "Let's get out of here," Craig urged, voicing the anxiety that had already settled. I shifted the car into first gear and gently released the clutch, feeling the vehicle begin to move. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught Craig making a rude gesture at the cashier as we drove off. the area under the bright lights giving way to darkness. Prick, he muttered under his breath. I steered left, retracing our route from earlier. The good news is, I found out where we are, I announced, pulling the map from my pocket and handing it over to Craig. He fumbled with it for a moment before a small flashlight clicked on, illuminating the paper. Dude, how did we end up almost as far east as Placer? He asked, his voice tinged with surprise. Guess we took a longer drive than usual, I replied, rolling down the window to flick cigarette ashes outside. My eyes glanced at the dashboard's analog clock, 2:45 a.m. Vanessa must be worried sick. Since we began dating 5 years ago, she had always been anxious about my late-night drives, fearing an accident might happen, whether with another vehicle, a tree, or an animal. More often than not, I'd find her awake upon my return, anxiety visible in her deep blue eyes. I chewed on my lip for, "Hey, you think I should text Vanessa to let her know we're okay?" I asked Craig, hoping for some reassurance. He snorted in response. "Honestly, bro, no. I know she loves you a lot, and it's great she cares, but she needs to trust you. Plus, you guys need some space. Being together all the time isn't healthy." I flicked the last bit of my cigarette out, releasing a scoff. "It's called being in love, man. You should try it some." Drawing a chuckle from him. "Nah, thanks. I like being single, though," he replied, still laughing. Shaking my head, I focused back on the road. The headlights slicing through the dark, nagging unease settled over me as we continued along the secluded two-lane road. The moon was nearly obscured by the dense canopy of trees over, and we hadn't passed another vehicle for hours. "What did you expect, Derek? You've driven us into the backwoods where it's all but deserted," I thought to myself with a hint of irony. "Might as well head to Idaho next time." Shaking off the creeping solitude, I rummaged through the center console and pulled out a mixtape. A bit of music seemed like just the thing to lift the mood. I slid the tape into the car's cassette player and pressed play. Soon, the thumping bass and synth of Dance with the Dead's That House filled the car. Craig cheered with excitement. "Dude, yes! This is exactly the vibe we need for a night drive like this." He rolled down his window, sticking his head out to shout joyfully into the night. I couldn't help but grin at his enthusiasm. "Friggin' goofball," I muttered affectionately. The upbeat music and his playful spirit helped ease my mind, and I felt the tension melt away, drifting out into the night air. We continued like that for a few minutes, the road unspooling into darkness behind us as we moved forward, the soundtrack of our journey blaring through the speakers, accompanied by the steady hum of the engine. I glanced at the clock. It was nearly 3. We should hit the highway soon, I reassured myself. Feeling relaxed, I reached back to grab my soda from the bag, catching it by the fingertips. I popped the cap while steering and took a quick sip, my eyes briefly leaving the road. But when I looked forward again, my heart skipped a beat. In that brief moment, a figure had appeared in the middle of the road. "Fucking hell!" I yelled, slamming both the brake and clutch. The car's rear tires screeched, locking up as the shrill sound of rubber grinding against the asphalt pierced the night. To my sheer horror, the car's tail began to fishtail wildly. "Oh, hell no," I muttered as the world outside morphed into a dizzying swirl of shapes and colors. For a terrifying few seconds, I braced for the worst, a collision with a tree, or a catastrophic roll. Mercifully, the car screeched to a halt, leaving us facing the direction we had come from. Black streaks on the asphalt marked where my tires had desperately gripped the road. My hands clung to the steering wheel, knuckles white as my heart hammered against my chest. I gasped for air in short, sharp breaths. Silence fell over us for a moment before Craig, with a shaky hand, reached forward and killed the music. "Dude, what the fuck?" His voice was loud, his face ashen. I didn't respond verbally, but yanked up the handbrake, unbuckled my seatbelt, and swung the door open with a forceful kick. Stepping onto the pavement, my legs felt like jelly as I moved to stand in the glare of the headlights. Scanning the area, I first looked down the road, then to the forest flanking either side. Nothing. Turning back, I peered over the car's roof where the taillights cast a faint red glow, revealing nothing but the enveloping darkness. Swiveling once more, I faced the woods, but the underbrush remained still, and apart from the faint hum of the idling engine, all was eerily quiet. Did I just imagine that? I muttered to myself, shaking my head in disbelief. No, it was real. I saw someone. As I pondered, the sound of the passenger door opening snapped me back. Craig stepped out and hurried over, leaving the door ajar. "You have exactly 20 seconds to explain what just happened before I lose it, bro," he demanded, his voice tense. I struggled for a moment to find my voice, then blurted out, Dude, I'm not crazy. Someone came out of the woods and onto the road. It looked like a woman." I exhaled. a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, trying to calm my racing heart. Craig's eyes widened in confusion. "You serious, man?" I nodded firmly. He pulled out the flashlight he had used earlier to examine the map and clicked it on, sweeping its beam first across one side of the road, then the other. As Craig continued to scan the surroundings with his flashlight, he eventually turned back to me, his expression puzzled. "Well, whoever it was, they're gone now." He paused, his forehead creasing in thought. "Why would anyone be out here in the middle of nowhere?" he muttered, almost to himself. Despite the eerie situation, I replied, "I don't know, man. It's Josephine County. For every good person out here, there's a fair share of oddballs." I could hear the hint of a laugh from Craig, but my attention was pulled away by a sudden unnerving sensation, a feeling as if someone was staring intently at the back of my head. I spun around quickly, eyes darting to the back of the car where nothing seemed amiss, yet the unsettling feeling lingered. Then, just as I faced forward again, the sensation struck anew, now seeming to come from the direction I had just checked. A chill ran down my spine and a flicker of fear set in. "Oh, shit," I whispered under my breath. Craig, noticing the change in my demeanor, turned sharply. "What?" he pressed, seeing the alarm on my face. I met his gaze, my voice faltering. "Let's get back in the car, right now," I urged. Without hesitation, he nodded and hurried to the passenger side while I rushed to the driver's door, propelled by the intensifying sensation of an unseen presence closing in from the woods. Breaking into a run, I yanked open the door and threw myself into the seat, slamming it shut and locking it in one fluid motion. Craig mirrored my actions, locking his door as he settled in. In the dim light, I couldn't see his face, but his voice painted a clear picture of his anxiety. "What the hell was that, man?" His tone was laced with a mix of fear and confusion, hinting that he too felt the oppressive dread. "You know those videos where people are driving on deserted roads at night and suddenly someone steps out to make them stop?" I asked, my voice tense as I started the car, eager to put as much distance as possible between us and whatever or whoever was out there. As Craig took a sharp breath beside me, he finished my thought with a tense voice. "And then a bunch of people spring out of the woods trying to ambush them." Oh, hell no. My thoughts exactly. Time to friggin' leave. I released the parking brake, buckled up quickly, and shifted the car into first gear. The tires chirped as I floored the accelerator, and within moments, we were speeding away, the unnerving sensation of being watched dissipating rapidly. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. We drove in silence for the next few minutes, the only sound being the hum of the engine and the rush of the wind. "I think we're in the clear, man." I finally broke the silence. Craig chuckled softly, relief evident in his voice. "Thank fuck for that." I nodded in agreement, reached down to retrieve my soda from where it had wedged itself by the parking brake, uncapped it, and took a long, satisfying gulp. The cool liquid was refreshing, calming my nerves slightly. After recapping it, I tossed it back into the back seat and let out a chuckle. "I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer, Craig, but I think after this, I may take a break from late night drives for a while. This just got under my skin too much," I admitted. There was a brief silence before he responded. "As much as that sucks, bro, I can understand. No problem at all." I sensed a twinge of sadness in his voice, mixed with something else I couldn't quite identify. Then suddenly he straightened up, his tone shifting to one of concern. "Jake?" he called out cautiously. "Yeah?" I responded, curious about his sudden change in demeanor. He took another deep breath. "Shouldn't we have reached the highway by now? Or at least seen the lights of passing cars?" His words snapped me back to the present, and I quickly looked ahead, straining to see beyond the beams of the headlight. "What the actual hell?" I echoed his concern. He was right. By now, the glow from the headlights of cars zipping along the highway should have been visible, cutting through the darkness. I distinctly remembered the route we had taken from the highway onto this road. As I continued to drive, the familiar red and white glows of traffic that should have been visible were conspicuously absent. Instead, only the darkness and the enclosing woods greeted us. A pang of uncertainty hit me, and I momentarily eased off the accelerator, allowing the car to slow as I processed the situation. "He's got to be mistaken. Hell, I've got to be mistaken," I muttered to myself, trying to rationalize our situation. "We just haven't reached the highway yet. You know how these old roads are, Derek. They always seem longer than you remember." I voiced this thought to Craig, hoping to convince us both. He nodded, but his face remained lined with doubt. Even as I tried to reassure myself, the doubt lingered. The incident with the mysterious woman on the road had unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. I pressed down on the accelerator again, shifting into fourth gear as the speedometer nudged towards 55 mph. For several more minutes, we drove in heavy silence, each of us lost in our thoughts. Suddenly, Craig shouted, "There! A light!" A flicker of hope sparked within me, and I leaned forward, straining to see the source. My hope quickly evaporated. It was just a lone streetlight standing like a lonely sentinel by the roadside. Beneath it, an old sign peppered with bullet and BB holes came into view. I slowed down to make out the faded words. Confusion washed over me as I read, "Golden, 2 miles." Craig echoed my thoughts with a bewildered exhalation. The sign receded behind us, the brief illumination from the streetlight casting a revealing light on his worried expression. How the hell did we end up near Golden? Golden is practically a ghost town. Golden, once a bustling mining community with several hundred residents, now attracted the curious and the brave as a ghost town preserved in time. Its standing buildings served as silent witnesses to a long-gone era. As we continued down the road, the history of Golden replayed in my mind. The town had thrived until the early to mid-20th century, but had become a ghost town after the mining prospects dried up. Its most recent claim to fame was a feature on a popular TV show, Ghost Adventures. Craig's repeated questioning snapped me back to the present, but I was at a loss for words. There's no freaking way, I thought. Golden is miles north of Placer, I muttered, more to myself than to Craig. There are no roads connecting them directly, at least not on the map, and we've been driving straight since we left the gas station. My voice betrayed my confusion and growing concern. In the dim light of the car, I saw Craig bury his face in his hands, equally perplexed. I reached shakily for my cigarettes, pulled one out, and pressed the car's cigarette lighter. As we passed the turnoff for Golden, I caught a glimpse of the old church spire looming momentarily against the night sky before disappearing behind us. The lighter popped and I lit my cigarette, the familiar action somewhat calming. Look, however we ended up here, the highway can't be far now, I reassured both Craig and myself. Let's just keep calm. When we get back, we'll have a good laugh about this with Vanessa. Sound good? Craig inhaled deeply, then exhaled slowly, his breath a mixture of relief and residual tension. Okay, yeah, that sounds like a plan, he agreed, managing a weak chuckle. I felt a pat on my shoulder. Thanks, Derek. You're seriously a good friend. Glad I've got you. I nodded, then remembered the darkness. No problem, man, I responded, feeling a hint of normalcy return to our interaction. I glanced at the clock, 3:00 a.m. Only 5 minutes had passed since I last checked, yet it felt like an eternity. Time seems different when you're stressed, I commented, more to myself than to Craig. Just as the tension began to ease slightly, a light appeared in the distance. Ah, there we go, I exclaimed, hopeful. We both watched for the highway sign to come into view, but my heart sank as instead the sign for Golden flashed by us again. That's, Craig started, but he didn't finish. I felt him tense beside me, a clear sign he too noticed the unnerving repeat of the Golden sign. As the streetlight faded into the darkness behind us, a familiar eerie sensation crawled over me, a chill reminiscent of the feeling of being watched that had unsettled us earlier. Glancing nervously at the trees blurring past, I saw nothing out of the ordinary, yet the sensation persisted. The turnoff for the ghost town loomed ahead again. Craig's voice, shaky and tense, broke the heavy silence. Derek, pull over, please, he said. Reluctantly, I eased the car to the side of the road, stopping just before the turnoff. Craig didn't hesitate. He unbuckled his seatbelt, pushed the door open, and stepped out. He walked to the front of the car and stood there, his body starting to tremble. Watching him, I could tell the night's events were taking their toll. I reached for my own door, but paused as I checked the time. The clock still read 3:00 a.m. unchanged. Confused, I tapped the glass, hoping it was just stuck, but the hands refused to move. A wave of shock washed over me. Okay, what the actual fuck is going on? I muttered under my breath. Pulling out my phone, I turned it on, only to find it too frozen at 3:00 a.m. The oppressive feeling of being watched grew strong. I glanced at Craig, who remained still in the darkness, then started typing a message to Vanessa. Hey, baby girl. Just wanted to let you know that Craig and I are okay. We're trying to get back to the highway, but got a bit turned around. Do me a favor, and if I don't text you again in 15 minutes, text me back, okay? I love you. I hesitated, then slid the phone back into my pocket. Although I wanted to convey more, I refrained, not wanting to alarm her unnecessarily and exacerbate my own growing panic. As I stared out into the dark, waiting for Craig to return, silence of the night seemed to press in, making every second stretch interminably. The stillness, the repetitive signs, and the frozen time, all of it felt like a bad dream from which we couldn't awaken. As I stepped out and rounded the car to stand beside Craig near the front right headlight, the chill night air bit at my skin. Dude, you all right? I asked, concern edging my voice. He remained silent, his figure stiff against the dim glow of the headlights. I called out to him again, a hint of urgency in my tone, but still he didn't respond. Craig, dude, You're creeping me out. Please say something, I pressed, my voice rising in alarm. Finally, he turned to face me, his features ghostly pale in the half-light. He lifted a hand weakly and pointed into the darkness. Look, was all he managed to utter. Following his gaze, a cold shock swept over me. About 50 feet away, just at the edge of the tree line, stood a figure shrouded in shadows. My heart lurched as I recognized her, the woman from the road, the cause of our earlier near disaster. The cigarette I had been holding fell from my numb lips to the ground. Fuck me sideways, man, I muttered, my voice barely a whisper. We should, get back in the car, Craig. He nodded quickly, his agreement coming out as a shaky whisper. Without taking our eyes off the spectral figure, we backed slowly to the car. The urgency of the situation overrode any thought of safety protocols, like seatbelts. I slammed the door shut, shoved the car into first gear, and hit the gas hard. Gravel flew as the tires spun, the car lurching forward with a desperate speed. I pressed the accelerator to the floor, the engine growling as we gained momentum. The speedometer climbed rapidly as I shifted through the gears, the needle hitting 60 miles mph as we entered fifth gear. The oppressive sensation of being watched grew stronger, almost tangible in its intensity. I found myself praying for any sign of civilization. An intersection, a house, even an abandoned payphone would have been a welcome sight, but instead, the same chilling light appeared again in the distance, the same haunting sign underneath. A glance at the dashboard confirmed my fear. The clock was still stuck at 3 a.m. Terror gripped me as the realization hit. Time itself seemed to have stopped, trapping us in this endless nightmare. This isn't good, bro, Craig muttered from the passenger seat, his voice laced with dread. I nodded silently in agreement, my focus fixed on the road as I pushed the car to its limits. The speedometer crept up to 80 mph, and as we approached the familiar turnoff again, my heart sank. The woman from before was now closer to the road, and hauntingly, she wasn't alone. Behind her, I could make out the silhouettes of dozens of figures, all standing eerily still, their gaze fixed on us as we sped past. They vanished from view as quickly as they had appeared, swallowed by the darkness behind. Fuck! I exhaled, the sight of the mass of figures, now closer to the road, chilling me to the core. This time, as the car's headlights swept over them, a horrific detail caught my eye, a river of blood staining the front of the woman's nightgown, an outfit that seemed torn from another era. What the hell do we do? Craig's voice broke through my thoughts, steady yet filled with palpable fear. I shook my head, feeling utterly lost. I don't know, man, was all I managed to reply. Just as the streetlight started to loom ahead once again, my phone vibrated sharply in my pocket, startling me enough that I nearly jammed on the brakes. I hastily pulled it out, noting Craig's anxious glance in my direction. When we stopped earlier, I texted Vanessa to reply back in a few minutes, I explained quickly, thumbing through my phone with trembling hands. Now I think I'm gonna tell her to call the cops or something. Craig didn't respond. His eyes were glued to the windshield, fixated on the approaching light. I flicked my gaze between the phone screen and the road, determined not to look at the turnoff as we passed the haunting light again. I didn't want to see just how close those apparitions, ghosts, demons, whatever they were, had gotten to the road. My fingers worked swiftly, sliding away the lock screen and tapping on the messenger icon. As the light began to appear once more, the message automatically opened, and a surge of relief washed over me. The small semblance of normalcy was momentarily grounding in the chaos of the night. I was stunned. Unable to tear my gaze away from the phone screen, the message from Vanessa was brief but inexplicably chilling, repeating in my head as I tried to process its meaning. A wave of confusion washed over me, and I couldn't help but voice it out loud. The fuck? Craig's voice cut through my thoughts, laced with urgency. What? What did she say? I couldn't bring myself to respond. My thoughts scattered as they crashed against a mental blockade that seemed to prevent any rational thought. As I grappled with this, Craig's voice came again. Eerily calm this time, a stark contrast to the fear that had tinged our earlier conversation. Can I ask you a question, man? The tone of his voice wasn't just flat, it was unsettlingly devoid of any emotion, as if he was a different person altogether. A shiver ran down my spine, and I forced a reply. What? We were speeding under the streetlight again when he posed his question, his voice unsettlingly serene. Are you scared? The simplicity of the question, under our bizarre circumstances, compelled me to turn and face him, just as the fleeting light from the street lamp bathed the car's interior. Our eyes locked for a moment, revealing a glint in his that I couldn't quite understand. The light passed, and as the familiar turnoff approached, my eyes flicked forward to catch sight of the woman from the road, now horrifyingly close. Her face caught in the headlights for a split second was enough to send me into a panic. I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat as I instinctively grabbed the door handle, yanking it open. The car swerved violently and a tree loomed directly ahead. Acting on pure instinct, I threw myself from the moving vehicle. The ground rushed up to meet me, and then everything went black. When I regained consciousness, I was lying in a hospital bed, my head bandaged and my arm in a sling, pain radiating through my chest. The room was quiet until Vanessa, sitting beside me, noticed I was awake. Her face, etched with relief and worry, crumbled into tears as she leaned over to embrace me. The comfort of her presence was a stark contrast to the nightmare we had just endured. A few moments later, a doctor entered the room. He remarked that I was fortunate, considering the circumstances. You've only sustained a gash on your head requiring staples, severely bruised ribs, and a broken arm, he explained, his eyebrow arched with a mix of surprise and professional curiosity. Quite shocking, given you dove out of a car at tremendous speed. Then he mentioned that the police were waiting to speak with me. When the officers came in, they asked a barrage of questions. I recounted the events of that night as accurately as I could, omitting only a couple of minor details. They took my story seriously, one of them noting, "We've had some reports similar to yours, sir." They also explained how I was discovered. A father and son who ran a nearby gas station had found my wrecked Honda wrapped around a tree and me unconscious in a ditch nearby. Their identity wasn't disclosed, but I had a hunch about who the son might be, the kid from the gas station. It's been 3 months since that night. I've been home, recovering and reflecting on the event. I try to avoid dwelling on it too much, fearing it might drive me insane, especially after learning from the police that they found no one else at the scene, just the passenger door ajar. However, I was forced to confront that night head-on again after receiving an email from an unknown sender claiming to be the son from the gas station. His message was filled with stories his father had seen for years, but never believed until that night. He described how he frantically called his father after seeing something alarming when he glanced out at my car. As I write this, the memory of that woman's face, illuminated by the headlights and marked by horror, makes me shake violently. She wasn't alone in her terror. The others shared that same frightened expression. And then there was Craig, or who I believed was Craig. When the interior light flicked on, his face was not human. His smile was too wide, his teeth shark-like, his eyes pitch black. But what haunts me the most isn't just the ghostly figures or Craig's monstrous transformation. It's the chilling message from Vanessa that I read under that ominous streetlight. It questioned the very reality of my friend's existence, a question that has since unraveled the fabric of my memories, leaving me to grapple with a horrifying realization. The message simply read, "Darling, who's Craig?" Those words echo in my mind, a stark reminder of the surreal and terrifying experiences of that night, ensuring I will never venture out for late night drives again.